killing every last one of the 22,000 goblins, humans, and elves settled across 200 cities in just 10 years is the ultimate Dwarf Fortress challenge. It forces you to recklessly grow in a game that normally rewards more measured expansion and makes everything you face bigger, from the armies at your door to the credible accusations that you're a genocidal warmonger and that the world will be a better place when you're 6 feet under instead of 3.5 feet above. This story here isn't just about maniacal dwarves who wear those accusations with pride. It's not about coming back to overcome a monumental challenge that I failed miserably at last year. It's not even about the lengths the dwarves go to just to keep their heads above the rising tide of blood they spill. This is how 7 dwarves founded what will be a nightmare of a fortress to try conquering the entire world in just a decade. The great fortress of Kulalrimtar is settled amidst savage lands full of dangerous creatures that will help train strong soldiers on the 15th of granite in the year 100. Zasit, a talented miner and passable doctor that mixes his passions with the occasional impromptu ice pick lobotomy, digs well past where I'd normally set up shop just below the surface. The economy instead starts above ground with a slew of workshops. It's what filthy humans would do, but there's just no time to dig someplace suitable below ground when Zasit's busy opening up a cavern within the first week. These huge but dangerous caves have promise, but like a promise of peace with the elves, it soon dies. There's fertile soil here, but the minerals within are disappointing, and the iron that ought to form the foundation of any dwarven military is completely absent. No, Zasit clears a path towards the first cavern to start food production. The first underground workstations are installed as a still and a kitchen that'll keep people fed in part by a farm on the nearby fertile cavern soil. Colette is a talented cook and brewer that will man the mess hall and hopefully help grow the economy because food is an amazing way to make money. The second cavern Zasit discovers is a huge watery expanse that again has tons of copper but no iron. The third cavern is a little more promising. There's some hematite here, which is an ore of iron, but it's trapped amongst distant walls and in hard to reach pillars. Hopes for steel-clad soldiers die out, but Zasit at least finds enough gold to make El Dorado look like a slum. Gold is too soft and weak to adorn soldiers that win the war themselves, but it will help lavish meals impress traders and draw more recruits once it's smelted down and crafted into exquisite goblets. Zasit's quest downward finally stops when he taps the Great Magma Sea before the first season has even come to a close. Magma smelters and magma forges are built to allow the plentiful gold to be worked in preparation for traders that will be arriving within a few months. But the smooth progress of this efficiency-focused start can't last. Deagle, the commander that was supposed to lead armies, tripped while climbing up the long staircase, fell out through the diagonal slit in the wall, and drowned in these watery caverns. Consider this your permission to skip leg day. A fresh wave of migrants is here to make up for this sudden short-handedness. In addition to a few decent crafters, there's some peasants here that will make for good soldiers. No one's a natural leader like Deagle was, but Medtab Unolalth steps up. She's no more skilled than the rest, but motivation is a powerful weapon. The woman was betrayed by a goblin monster slayer when she was 17, left to wander the wilds, and returned to civilization to lead an attack on other goblins. When she heard about Kulalrimtar's mission, she came rushing to join up. The soldiers-to-be still need gear to stand against these threats that twirl their evil mustaches and steal wheelbarrows for some reason. And so Zasit slowly mines out tunnels to access the little bits of iron they do know about. Zasit only finds some total of 10 spots with 3 or 5 blocks of iron ore each, which will slow already slow progress. Hey, traders! So nice to see you. No, everything's great. There's no problems here. Golden goblets alone are enough to buy everything Kol Alramtar could want from these traders. Though Zolban is such a bad appraiser that they have to rely on the traders to spread accurate tales of the wealth created here. Well, traders and a cheat console in an alternate universe that show Kol Alramtar is worth well over 100,000 dwarf bucks just 6 months in. As creator and or sadistic overlord of the extended JDD YouTube universe, I had to create an entire alternate timeline to see that, because while Zolban tried a course on appraising, he lost motivation when it was just lecture after lecture. If only he'd had a better way, like say a course designed by this video's sponsor, boot.dev. They gamified learning back-end web development to make it more engaging so the lessons stick and you become a better software dev when you go out and look for a job. Just think about how much more you remember about the intricate details of games like complicated production pathways than you do subjects that are arguably more important. You'll pick up the programming languages Python and Go as you work through a wide variety of projects themed like an RPG that are designed to get you writing code instead of just reading lessons. If you've ever considered being a software dev or just want to peek at what it's like, boot.dev is perfect because all of their content is free to read and watch in guest mode. You can check out the projects and lessons you'll be using without even making an account. If you do purchase a membership and find it isn't a good fit for you, they offer a 30-day, no questions asked refund policy. Click my link in the description and use my promo code JustDon'tDie to get 25% off your first payment of a month or a full year. Admittedly, back in the main universe, Zolban sleeps on the ground and not in a mansion because the fort doesn't even have a basic dormitory. So, Zasit and the other miners finally start working on public facilities like a dining experience near the kitchen and a dormitory to hopefully stave off revolution. The promise of great meals and passable beds draw more migrants, including a good speaker, a talented weaponsmith, a couple of basic soldiers, and a few peasants with no real skills that'll be trained into soldiers or handle busy work. Among those is Silob Urvadunakor, who developed weapon skills throughout their early life after being attacked by a troll as a baby and what's called a horror of the night when they were a teen, before also being imprisoned at the age of 12. Mentab welcomes the newcomers into the first squad, the Neutral Rags, to begin honing their skills and hopefully be in a position to teach future newbies. It'd be great to give them at least iron weapons to work with, but with the metals so rare and even the best weaponsmiths so mediocre, what iron is there would be wasted, and so instead they get the weak but plentiful copper. It's ironic that a fortress so dedicated to war is far better at working the economic metal. The gold they've mined even manages to coax Zasit into a crafting trance that really highlights how lopsided and backwards this fortress is. There's gold everywhere, but no basic stoneworking facility anywhere. Hopefully, whatever they make can join the gold altars being placed in what'll be temples to try and make the dwarves happy. Keeping them in good spirits while they're in constant wars and likely losing their friends to some of them could be troubling in the years to come. But I want everyone to be happy. Except Zasit. I hope they're fucking miserable. Iron is scarce, and what do they make but a throne out of iron ore the smelters so desperately need? I mean, it's cool, but come on. Now this video is gonna fall off hard in year 5 and just have a horrible last season. The military starts to train up near the front of the base while dwarves share mirth and poetry down below. The fort is wealthy with goods, lavish meals, and plentiful booze. And so it's time for the economy to switch to preparing for war. A second metal smithery and a litany of magma smelters go in to prepare to make equipment. Hopes for some legendary armor or weapons from another strange mood are quickly dashed when it's but a copper ring. But it does immediately make Solon into a legendary crafter, which will mean better gold furniture and goblets down the line. And I can't stress this enough, it didn't use any iron, so whatever it is, I'm okay with it. And with that, the first year ends fairly well. There's been no tangible progress on raiding, of course, but the fortress is rich, and they've got the fundamentals needed to equip future soldiers. The iron scarcity is worrying, but there's ways of dealing with it. Spring brings an elven caravan, who consider the dwarves allies because they're ignorant of Kulal-Ramtar's true intentions. They sell a giant cougar and a grizzly bear that Zolban swears will only be trained into war animals for defensive use. Before the elves leave, they get to watch logs start being burned into charcoal to prepare to make steel. That fitting foreshadowing of what'll happen to their forest retreats coaxes complaints from them that get ignored. The dwarves need steel. The elves' bitter tears are just a bonus. A migrant wave, buoyed by traders' tales of plentiful gold, arrive and add 20 dwarves to the population. My last fortress that didn't focus on early wealth had just 19 dwarves at this point. The focus on the economy is working here. The migrant wave has a few soldiers, a talented armorsmith that the current armorer Thicket smugly tells isn't needed, and a high master armorsmith that just laughs both of them out of the room. Odom takes the sweat-soaked forge, and the man wants steel. The metalworking quarter is further expanded to begin scaling everything up in preparation for the next wave of workers. Though with only a little bit of iron found and 26 bars of the stuff needed for each set of steel gear, the soldiers will definitely have some coppery weak points. What's mined is enough to get the metalworkers started, and so Odom soon makes the first steel shields, while Zasteet's crew prepares to make actual bedrooms decorated by golden furniture made from the rest of the bars. Goblets might be worth more, but furniture makes the dwarves happy. And while some people might call me a ruthless iron-fisted tyrant, or the scourge of empathy, or blight upon the world, or the destruction of all that's holy, or a lot of different things, I care about their happiness. Because it affects how quickly they do their job and might make or break this whole challenge. Admittedly, those gold-encrusted bedrooms will have mediocre stone doors because there's no one even remotely good at working it yet. Odom soon makes masterpiece steel armor, and the military swaps over to that beautiful gray hue. Though they may need another type of protection, seeing as how two wrestlers give birth almost back to back, even though they only have a public dorm room without any privacy. Between that, masterpiece quality weapons, and exquisite meals, the returning dwarven caravan is accompanied by a diplomat that elevates Kulal-Ramtar into an official colony. That'll mean bigger trade wagons with even more of the iron they're requesting going forward. By once again cheating and then reloading a save, Zolban can confidently say the fort's worth $500,000 and then suffer from sudden onset amnesia. That wealth is enough to almost immediately draw a huge wave of migrants that may not have super useful skills, but do have the super useful ability to be warm bodies. Medtob's best break off to form new squads that'll shape these recruits into useful shock troops. It's been a year and a half since this mission started. War finally lies on the horizon. The goblins to the east call themselves the Gory Cruelty, but we'll see how that name stacks up against Medtob in the years to come. Their capital is a terrifying 2,000 strong, but the outlying sites usually only have a dozen or 3 goblins that'll help forge the commander into the ultimate tactician as she leads the neutral rags to raise the little pits. The other soldiers watch her leave with pride while they train up in hopes that they'll one day join her on the warpath. The largest order of armor yet goes in to help equip those very soldiers. Those training will get the more affordable copper, while those venturing out will get what steel and iron can be made. The trainees get some help from a would-be thief volunteering to give them their first live combat experience after being lured by talk of this new prospective barony. They drop gear, but since they were some supermassive 5'3" giant of a person, it is too big for a dwarf. However, it's the perfect size to be smelted down into metal bars, which is the main way that Kulal-Ramtar seems like it'll be getting the thousands of bars of iron that it will eventually need. It isn't long before Medtab returns with news that her first raid went as well as could be expected. The soldiers under her command killed every goblin they met and rampaged about the huts to loot the place. There is still someone hiding out that they couldn't find, and so the site isn't fully destroyed, but since Medtab needs experience leading in combat, not hide and seek, she turns her attention towards sites with more goblins. The war this brought, and it is a proper war now that the gory cruelties is incensed by this unprecedented attack, is worrying but needed. It's been long enough without real military progress, and the goblins will eventually bring gear worth smelting down when they come to die at Kolaramtar's gates. Though the goblins may not be the only ones to die at the gates. The soulless, merciless, bloodthirsty brutes mass up and come to ask, bruh, even without the neutral rags abroad, this fight would ride on a razor's edge. There's so many goblins, and the dwarves just aren't that well equipped yet. Even a victory could cripple Kularamtar's budding military. And so Zolban makes up something about the city they attacked, having stolen from them first. The stupid goblins buy it. It's humiliating to accept the deal, but it is definitely the right call until Medtab's military is more threatening, and it can handle these huge attacks that'll definitely be back once they realize this was not some one-off event. Medtab garners more experience with another victory, though she pauses her raids for at least long enough to grab some steel weapons made from Erdum, who's eager to move up from the copper they'd previously been practicing with. The exceptional steel mace will serve her well as she starts to head off to war basically constantly from here on out. Oh, hey Cyril, you ready to smelt that iron ore down? Well, I'd love to, but someone made another artifact out of iron. Was this some kind of pacifist protest? Or maybe they're just mad because you haven't clicked the like button yet. In addition to the iron shortage, gold is starting to run out too. Captured beak dogs that Medtab stole from the goblins are hideous creatures, but they're still butchered for tallow that fuels soap makers, hides for the leather workers, and of course meat for Coulette's kitchen. The wealth draws enough migrants that nearly 100 dwarves call this place home after just 2 years. And though the focus is oft on the military, those here that want things like burgeoning guilds for stoneworkers that do almost nothing, and farmers that do considerably more, are going to get them. Temples are made, prompting other religions like the alarmingly named Bronze Cult to ask for one of their own. Art is commissioned, and sculptors work engravings about the fortress to both further inflate its wealth and to carve out important pieces of history. Both creatures around Kolaramtar and the litany of thieves from abroad all try to dent the progressing fortress, though fortunately, they achieve little beyond the most basic of disruptions. Okay, and a dead child, but Dwarf Fortress doesn't even let you send kids to mine, so it's not that much of a loss. A fresh wave of migrants pushes the population up over 100, and though no one is particularly useful for their skills, Medtab still doesn't have high standards for the military, and their pulses qualify them. The Allied Roads and the Trumpet of Verse are the newest squads that each have a few experienced soldiers to teach the newbies that join everyone except for Medtab's neutral rags. That brings the military up to a clean 60 soldiers. There is enough iron to give half the soldiers steel, but the other half would be entirely clad in copper, and that's just a recipe to only have 30 soldiers by this time next year. Instead, everyone's going to have steel weapons, but mostly rock iron armor. Bins of golden goblets worth over 60,000 each convince the dwarven diplomats to elevate Kularamtar into a proper barony. They also speak about the war between the humans and the goblins in the south. Since the fortress is visibly worth 500,000 even without cheating Zolban's appraisal skill up in an alternate universe, Kularamtar can finally afford a single ambulance ride in America, and they start getting healthcare by denoting and stocking a hospital up above. They start making new clothes after years of wearing the same ragged gear since arriving, right before the military gets the first huge completed work orders of iron. Migrants fit to use it arrive, though for some strange reason, almost none of them have weapon skills, despite boasting a fair bit of experience with every other aspect of combat. I can't even imagine how crazy the tavern brawls must get back home. The military's expansion is done, the gear upgraded, training is going well, and it is time for the first enemy sites to fall. Psylob leads 20 dwarves against smaller cities to train his tactical skills, while Medtob leads 30 soldiers against the first medium-sized towns with some 60 or 75 foes each. They leave behind a squad of melee soldiers and a small squad of archers to defend the 50-ish civilians left, but all those missing hands abroad slow down work at home, and so even basic tasks like hauling goods start to be left undone. Still, the wheels of war are turning. Psylob marks the first raised site of this world-spanning campaign. Medtob refuses to be outdone by the newer commander and cleans up her much more difficult target on the very next raid. Sending so many soldiers with him seems to be working, and so 50 of the 60 melee soldiers will be constantly abroad, with only the briefest leave allowed for the remaining 10 going forward. Winter thickens, and the fourth artifact in 3 years is a boot. Yep, boot, not boots. Because apparently resources are somehow scarce when half your fort is just made of soldiers. Since it's not really good for wearing, it's instead used to upgrade a temple that unfortunately draws a very aggressive missionary here to lodge a peaceful complaint. Fortunately, they just throw themselves in the water and seem to splash about for fun. Completed steel weapons draw my attention away, with plans of putting the spare bars into more shields and other armor, which does unfortunately mean the missionary sneaks in. The human glory seekers still here after coming when the fortress was first founded do the fighting instead of the soldiers. Not only does that keep the dwarves safe, the dead humans even have the decency to drop iron gear that can be smelted down. But though that attack provided no meaningful consequences, the assault of agitated beasts no doubt hopped up on elven voodoo magic, weigh heavy on woodcutters and crafters above ground. The one squad left home helps where they can, but there's danger about the fortress despite their efforts, and little opportunity for reinforcements when the military's attacks abroad destroy site after site. By the time the new year arrives, they've burned down 8 goblin villages in total, and I may not have a PhD in math, but that seems like an infinity% increase over last year, so this challenge is basically already free. The dwarves are largely just getting started though, and the next 7 years will have plenty more problems and so much more destruction. Things are going to get genocidal, and that is definitely something the good guys say. More migrants arrive and push the fortress above 130 dwarves within 3 years. But since agitated wildlife continues trying to drag that number back down, an economic hub is finally carved out underground so civilians can hide away, like what normally happens within the first month of my fortresses. The intricate layout will eventually house workshops for everything but metalworking below and sustenance near that first cavern. It won't protect them from everything though. A slew of these freakish creatures arrive to cause problems below ground after the rumbles of the tapped magma sea and ongoing wars call to them. Despite their interruptions, steady progress is made as the season passes. The economic hub begins being built out. Important visitors eager to see progress visit the fortress. Wonderful artifacts are made by happy dwarves, and soldiers steadily equip more and more steel every time they come back from another successful mission abroad. That armor will get its first test now that the gory cruelty returns to ask, seriously bro, what the fuck? They won't be bought off so easily this time. And though Medtob's military could definitely handle the huge force the goblins brought last time, not only are there over 100 soldiers here, but they brought beasts straight out of mythology. Terrifying cave dragons have come to leave the fortress in ruins. There's even ogres, trolls, and other creatures that goblins unleash. There's little room for Medtob's tactics amongst the absolute hell that unfolds, but the dwarves churn their foes into a fine pace as they strike through the heart of this invading force. In the end, their steel and their metal let them trade 7 dead for over 150 enemies whose blood is spent decorating the fortress and whose corpses will serve as warning to would-be attackers in the future. Perhaps even better than depleting Shimmer Stolen of over 100 goblin soldiers though, is the 70 sets of iron gear that are here to be smelted down. It's much slower than working ore, but it could mean the end of the iron scarcity. New recruits replace both the 7 that died and those that need to be removed from active duty while they deal with serious injuries in the now busy hospital. Dwarves abroad hear about the massive victory though, and arrive to both further bolster the military and help expand the economy. Seeing the strength of the attacking force though, the dwarves don't return to attack the capital. They instead head for some of the outlying goblin settlements that provided needed food. They also set their sights on the human empire in the Far East, giving them time to better prepare by both training up and getting more steel equipment. The Scholarly Kingdoms is a bit of an odd name considering it's just one kingdom, and it would be way more scholarly to be prepared for dwarven attacks instead of just focusing on nerd stuff. Their capital is weak, and Medtab rampages through it on the first attack before heading back for more. Some humans riding atop their weird horses and with barking war dogs at their side show up to ask for mercy, but the fools fail to realize their capital is being destroyed while they pointlessly plea because they value peace and sentient life. Forgotten beasts aren't as nice though, and leap forth from the kiddie pool as soldiers trickle back from abroad. Stodier should wait for backup, but the screams for help that echo down long hallways refuse to let him wait. He charges the creature one-on-one, shakes off the numbing toxin, and cleaves it in two with his axe. The man will wear a limp all the way back to the hospital, but he is more than deserved a break, while the rest of the military heads back to teach the humans that Kolaramtar's lands have a strict 4'6" height maximum. The tall people break almost immediately, and the soldiers spend more time chasing the fleeing fools down than actually fighting them. That's just good cardio warm-up to prepare for the long walk back to their homeland to finish the job, before the humans that are left can wonder what happened to their sons. Kolaramtar is even to the point where they take in willing people looking for sanctuary from other empires, including human children that ask silly, random questions like, "Am I being kidnapped?" Perhaps the fire-breathing Forgotten Beast is a karmic punishment, come to make a mess of the fortress and its frame rate. The soldiers arrive after nearly 15 real minutes, and though their hacking incapacitates it quickly-ish, they can't kill the beast. It takes a miner that casually caves its skull in with a single blow while wandering by to actually save the fortress. Between the slow response to threats like this beast, the agitated wildlife above, and the random minotaur attack, the steady loss of dwarves finally starts to offset the trickle of migrants in. Less wealth is being made without plentiful gold ore, and so this meteoric rise seems to be in danger of slowly tapering out. It's at least more of a danger than the goblin scouting parties the gory cruelty continues sending to figure out what happened to their actual army. The military's power continues to grow, as Medtab plans to add a squad of spear wielders on that'll be better at piercing deep into huge forgotten beasts or elven creatures. There's also a new squad of swords dwarves that join the 2 more experienced ones, 2 full squads of axe dwarves, Medtab's squad of all-rounders, a group of mace dwarves, and half a squad of archers. All of the iron smelted down from goblin gear gives Odom plenty of material to work with equipping them all, but no amount of steel can figure out where his old bond went. There was no warning, no message about them being missed, and yet they're gone without a trace. Their tomb's not filled. Thob the mayor takes over their duties, but what even happened? Goblin assassination? Undead black magic? Some deity's karma? Human kidnapping and putting them on a tall shelf? It puts a dour mood on an otherwise good year. 16 sites have been destroyed, though 4 were immediately resettled from the surrounding capital cities. The scholarly kingdoms are almost gone, and a library is constructed to store the few tomes they have worth taking. More fresh migrants install exquisite clear glass windows after their perfect introduction to the forest that is beating an agitated giant bird to death with their bare hands mere minutes after arriving. The military gets due appreciation in the form of a nice barracks near the entrance that'll hopefully serve to at least mildly delay the problematic PTSD and depression that their warmongering has started to cause. Spring finishes passing, and summer's rising heat is marked by a goblin raid that gives the newest trainees their first live combat experience. They're quickly defeated, but they're followed by the last of the human army, which arrives to plead for mercy for their final 2 towns. While they are at least strong enough for the poorly skilled trainees to be a little bit afraid, Medtab announces her return by informing them that their empire is actually down to just one last city, and her mere reputation sends the humans fleeing. Medtab heads to the last place in the world they can call home. Sylob, though, leads his now 30 soldiers to the southeast to start a war against a new human kingdom. The soon-to-be ironically named Permanent Empires hold the most land of any civilization, but their population has been weakened by war with their gory cruelty. The best the humans can hope for now is to get their revenge when the betrayed Tall People adventurers rise as ghosts and kill some of those that threw their lives away. It only exacerbates problems with undone work that likely begin to grow worse. Without hands to lead freshly captured animals to food, they starve in the tunnels and temples and start to rot. The miasma they spew is enough to ruin a dwarf's day, but that is slightly better than just dying to the wildlife above that the spearmen now get their live training at in preparation for killing the elves' giant creatures. Medtab does cap off the 5th summer by announcing that the Scholarly Kingdoms is officially no more. Some 24 sites have fallen in total, and though progress is only slowly accelerating, it is still building momentum. The arrival of a much-needed caravan should hopefully help with that. The human attack last year meant that it couldn't come, and while there is a constant need for new blood to lube the gears of war, there were no fresh tales of wealth to draw ever more useful hands. And as over 250 foes arrive at the gate, including dozens of cave dragons, ogres, and trolls, Kulalrimtar needs all the fresh faces it can get. This fortress is as militant as they come, but Medtab's squads rally forth with battle cries and cheers despite being outnumbered 3 to 1. The goblins were not prepared for such vicious and skilled fighters. What kind of moron would go start more wars for experience while they're already locked in brutal struggle with the goblins? Some of that hard-earned experience is lost when an archer and a hammerlord are both crushed by dragons, but the rest of the dwarves use their expertise and steel to slaughter their way through the chaos. Shimmered is whittled down from over 1,000 to just 750, though rumors of their plentiful war pets seem to have been proven right, so it will stand there for now. The mass brawls here are great for dealing with dragons and ogres where they can be ganged up on, but fights off-screen are one-on-one, and their sheer size can win out there. It's little surprise that the scout voluntold to go peek at how many war pets there are decides they'd rather take a nap. But since they never return after they do finally go, the military instead attack the humans in the south to continue building their skills and accruing more of the steel gear that still only covers half their bodies. Medtab gets a long overdue break after taking out the Scholarly Kingdoms, which is kind of needed because she's a single mother to 3 that never sees her kids. Sylob leads rapid-fire attacks in her place and targets 10 human sites belonging to the Permanent Empires in just 4 months. They say good art comes from suffering, and given all this horrible miasma about, it's no surprise that religious figures make artifacts. Though no animals are starving now, butchered cuts of meat aren't able to be stored in a stockpile before they rot, because there still are just never enough free hands to help. It's a large part of why moods that had been so good start to sour, though given that the worker shortage is going to continue so that the military gets its recruits, this is just going to get worse and worse over time and could prove disastrous. Dwarves might look like stout little guys, but when angry, they throw huge tantrums like spoiled kids with chainsaws tied to their arms. 14 human towns are destroyed throughout the winter, and after more than 1,000 kills, the Permanent Empire is a third gone already. Spring's arrival means the 10-year mission is halfway done one way or another. And though the military's presence doesn't yet match that ticking timeline, it is at least catching up. It's just a shame there's no chance to celebrate it. The fort is dirty and underworked, and though it still draws migrants, there's still danger the fort seems powerless against at home to slowly grind those numbers down. Not that it should be the least bit surprising that ghosts are here. Kulolimtar isn't even a mass grave. That'd imply the rotting giblets below and the pocked bones above were buried or cared for in some way. The giant, agitated wildlife that picked them clean get a fresh meal of humans from the Southern Empire, and though a forgotten beast tries to be more of a threat using their foul, frozen extract, the Speardors trained by giant animals above weather the numbness and the choking to pierce deep into the thing's skull and kill it in a way that Swordsdwarves could only dream of. New migrants are slowly integrated into the military, and though Medtob doesn't need more foot soldiers to accomplish great things like taking out their capital, a third commander is trained up. Cyril leads the Hames of Reasons to start mopping up small settlements so that the other commanders can focus on sites that'll provide more of a fight. All the raids keep looting animals, leading to a zoo that's generously called Animal Cruelty. And yes, that is being generous, considering the 300 animals here are cramped into a tiny space, kept next to rotting carcasses littering the butcheries. It's a corner necessarily cut to keep the military so strong that goblin counterattacks are so weak it's hard to even call them a siege. The last human empire in the south is also attacked soon after. The Union of Girders boasts two strong demi-capitals of 2,000 each, but Medtob leads an absolute slugfest of a siege against one. She doesn't quite manage to break down the gates even with 70 soldiers, but they didn't nearly have the number of humans and war dogs guarding the place before exhaustion forced them back. That won't stop Medtob from immediately returning with most of the soldiers in tow to finish the job, while the remainders head out with Cyril to train his tactical skills or defend the fort against the ever-growing threat of ant people that attack more and more frequently and sometimes manage to kill the occasional civilian in the caverns. Why does Medtob keep kidnapping children? I mean, it's not like PR is a high priority for Kulolimtar, but you just can't kidnap. There's even more of them? Her fourth siege rampages through the largest human capital in the world, and the seventh depletes it of its last defenders. Medtob arranges for a civilian to go occupy the site, while she hits the nearby cities to make sure they make the right call as the 6th year comes to a close. Another pathetic goblin attack is but a faint flicker in the pan to mark the new year. The follow-up human attempt to retrieve the children is more sizable, but the Dwarven soldiers have nearly full sets of steel gear after years of slowly but steadily accumulating it. They turn into living garbage disposals that slaughter through a couple hundred foes without suffering worse than a few minor injuries. Their bloodlust splashes the fields afresh, but this outlet for their rage, that's totally healthy, don't check my trunk, is starting to prove insufficient. After 3 months of hiking off to distant human lands to butcher dogs, it's kind of understandable, but their moods are worrying all the same. A civilian's tantrum is dangerous. A soldier's can end societies. Still, with the Union of Girders' main army defeated, the military wastes no time in heading for their other capital at the southwestern tip of the world. While they're gone, the single engineer left in the fortress starts working on a mist generator that'll pump water up above the tavern and let it fall down because dwarves are addicted to mist. This is their craft, their religion, their sole reason to even be alive. And if that's too much, it's only by a little bit. Hopefully it'll help curb their apathy and lessen their depression, even as their friends slowly die to almost constant attacks from the caverns because the soldiers defending their homeland take a few days to run from the top of the fortress where they're training, even though they've had their numbers bolstered with some miners turned soldiers. Spring once again turns to summer as the Union of Girders is worked down to half its initial population, and civilians carve artwork into stone that feature the cave dragons they fought and the very fortress's founding. It's a good reminder of what they fight for, which will hopefully stave off the crippling depression of soldiers that wander in and out of the fortress. If that's not enough, they could always descend into the depths to watch forgotten beasts battle it out amongst each other like kaiju. Maybe that could stave off the civilians' misery as they walk by nearly 900 corpses when they go grab the gear the military drops off before immediately heading back out, and the constant attacks the returning Dwarven army has to crush. And don't forget the Forgotten Beasts, the ant people who attack more and more as summer bleeds into autumn, that last counterattack that's little more than the death girdles of the Union of Girders, their missing friends as the soldiers go abroad more and more frequently, all of their friends being drafted into the army, but hey, some mist in their face can cure all of that. Probably. A channel is mined out to feed a generator that's got power lines running all the way to the surface for some windmills. Water flows in to turn it all on, and 2 people have already drowned. But 54% of you that think the total coincidences that have just happened to kill dwarves most of the time I make one of these represent me having some sort of problematic pattern of negligence. They're only drowning because a terrifying beast is pushing dwarves into lakes. So, bet you feel dumb for doubting me now. Hopefully the loss of those friends is offset by this perfect mist generator, making anyone that eats in the tavern feel a little extra happy without hurting any of them. Medtob tries to stop civilians from dying by setting up a second training squad in the caverns. While she works on it, Psylob and Cyril finish off the last humans in the southwest, which marks the end of both the permanent empires and the Union of Girders. The rest of winter is spent bearing the cold of the lone necromancer tower in the world, tempered only by staying warm near the flaming remains of the goblin villages raised there. Progress outpaces time, though it's not clear if it can catch up in the remaining years. The constant biannual waves of migrants are reassuring, though the ant people still do their best to chip into that every month. That doesn't stop the goblins in the north from being incited by a lone attack, just as those send soldiers to die at the dwarven gates. The severe plague is the strongest empire left, led by a capital about which dark rumors swirl. The pre-penultimate, which is 1000% a word, don't go check it, spring nears its end with progress against the nearby remnants of the gory cruelty. 4 sites drop in 2 weeks thanks to the short trips, and though it draws a weak counterattack from what's left of them, and then a much larger force from the severe plague looking for peace, neither one of the goblin armies comes even close to threatening the fortress. The capital of Shimmeredstolen used to have 1,000, but the forces they've thrown at Kol Alrimtar over the years have bled them down. Unfortunately, they aren't weak, and though Medtob leads well, a few soldiers still die to the fortress's 200 trolls, 200 cave ogres, the dozens of remaining cave dragons, and the hundreds of other creatures what few goblins are left command. Worse, the dwarves only actually killed about 1/3 of their foes, and there's no way around this. The soldiers head back to weather more losses, but despite that, they do their job. The 3rd attack in the middle of summer finishes off the forces, and a civilian goes to occupy the site, ending the gory cruelty and more than half of the world's targets. Perhaps it isn't surprising the military did fairly well against even those huge foes, considering they have plenty of practice. Between that and archers actually proving quite good at cleaning up fights by dodging around, even more of the shock troopers are sent abroad. Word that the civilians will be less defended exacerbates already dire moods, leading to more and more fights at home that are even more troublesome than those abroad. This is the first serious brawl, but they'll only get worse as moods continue to crater. All of the death is even enough to mark migrants as arriving despite the danger for the first time. Things only continue to fall apart. A forgotten beast breaks through lines thinned as soldiers are sent abroad to chew up civilians before archers plink it down. The 10 that died to it are sacrifices, blood given to speed up the fight against the goblins just a little bit. Safety abandoned in favor of reckless militarization that is at least doing its job. Royalty wander about aimlessly and depression starts to creep up. The fortress is so in disarray that spiders web up areas just a stone's throw away from the food. Common spaces are left dirty. The war machine barely even notices that it's just bulldozing over what should be speed bumps. Armies never stop leaving as soon as they arrive back home, though more brawls break out to paint the inn in blood and the hospital in loose teeth. Despite the third brawl in mere months, the 8th year ultimately ends with the fortress intact and another wave of a few dozen goblins dead at the edge of the local area. There's just 2 years left now. Tar doesn't have to stand much longer, but it won't be standing much beyond that. Everything is collapsing in on them. Bitter faces arrive to don bloody gear and replace those lost to conflict. Would they have even come if they knew the truth of what they were facing here and hadn't just been lured by tales of golden goblets? With the western outpost of the severe plague left in ruins, the soldiers head east to the bulk of the empire. The capital has been depopulated, and though the soldiers worry about trolls, ogres, and cave dragons after what happened in the last capital, they are instead greeted and decimated by a demon. These things are terrifying in the one-on-one off-screen fights, and so Medtab manages to get everyone to retreat after they kill the rest of the goblin defenders. The demon can be left to rule their empty capital for now. The dwarves march for progress against the rest of the goblin cities, as months marked by only the occasional brawl and Medtab's reports from abroad continue to pass. One such fight ends up killing a diagnostician trying to get a more personal understanding of the brawls to put an end to them. Perhaps the only way to stop the violence from within is to stop being the violence on the outside and examine the societal oh my god, is that a dragon? Tar has dragons! Medtab managed to steal 7, and yes, they can be turned into war animals, even though no one here is actually good at training animals. Medtab's Soulsbolt, the closed stoker of inks, who's killed over 100 foes and led even more missions, gets a dragon entourage to massively boost the neutral rags' power as they start war with the final Goblin Empire. The Hellish Seduction is based in the frigid north and boasts the strongest capital left on the map. 2,000 plus foes, plus, as they feared, some 400 ogres and trolls, just like at Shimmered-Stolen. A few of the newer soldiers leave corpses that'll never thaw again, but about half of the single biggest obstacle left on the map died with them. Medtab immediately launches a follow-up attack. She's not even back before what's left of the Hellish Seduction's army launches their largest counterattack yet, and another 100 ant people also launch their largest force too. The split military lets a few civilians drop before spawn camping the ants and scampering back up and into the base to meet the goblins inside. The plan to bait them there to concentrate the dwarven forces and hamper their archers is absolutely flawless, assuming you don't mind the human child that plays a little too close to the goblins. They split the goblin forces that charge forth to butcher the kidnapped child, and so the dwarves themselves charge out and send fresh waves of goblin blood to fertilize the shrubs. The over 300 foes end up dying, and though 4 dwarves join them, the goblins' largest army is defeated a few days before a civilian sends word back that they managed to capture the capital they came from. The rest of the Hellish Seduction's small holdings are next. It seems like it's not a question of if the dwarves will be able to conquer the world, it seems like a question of when they will. Though perhaps that is too greedy. The outside threats seem conquerable at this point, but inner turmoil might be too much to handle. Gone are the random workers that clean up rotten giblets. The fort is messier than any sight a dwarf has ever seen because civilians keep dying in small numbers to the huge attacks or are sent abroad to conquer sites more quickly. Amidst the vomit, ichor, blood, and miasma lay just 51 dwarves when the soldiers leave, 8 of which are in the hospital to begin with. And though migrants come, fewer and fewer arrive every season without more wealth to draw them. The penultimate autumn ends with the Hellish Seductions on even shakier legs than Tar. Their latest counterattack is so weak that a single soldier cleans it up, and yet a goblin scholar visits to ask why. Why the bloodshed? Why hunt down 80% of the world's goblins? Why continue even when they just want to return to their ancestral homelands in the south? Winter fades, with everything in the south recaptured or re-raised, and everything in the northwest destroyed. Every one of the latest migrants sent off into the world to speed up progress. The final year is fittingly welcomed with the Age of Legends, as the empires that have ruled for all of recorded history die out. The 15th of Granite arrives, and in the last year, there's 62 enemy sites left after 386 missions. Fortunately, most are small depleted hamlets, though hunting them to the last takes more raids. The non-stop onslaught eats away 2 months in mere edited moments. Even legendary crafters are sent off to occupy small settlements and resilient towns. 9 months left. 12 goblin sites have died, ending the hellish seduction and leaving the severe plague as the last goblin empire. Moods grow more dire, and the remaining civilians semi-frequently go berserk, as if beating each other for the slightest of perceived slights will placate them. Another 4 goblin sites fall in the next month, and every remaining one is either currently being attacked or will be occupied in time, so the dwarves finally turn on the first elven city. Baronesses sink into depression, and the city's mood is as bad as I've ever seen any fortress. This downward spiral has no brakes. Kulet, Rahl, and Urist were 3 of the first 7 dwarves, but everyone else is free game for the draft. Who needs surgeons in a town with no one left to be injured? What use is there for a lone scholar in a cluttered library? The miasma-seeped halls that used to thrum with energy now barely have footsteps to send echoing down their lengths. It's little wonder that no more migrants want to arrive for the first time. The square scales have been allies for decades, but no elves can truly be dwarf friends, and so they're the next empire that has to weather Medtab's might. Late summer arrives, 7 months and 37 sites remain. The dwarves are ahead of the needed pace for this year, but without civilians to occupy weakened but not destroyed sites, the military has to re-hit damaged cities to destroy them, which slows down progress. The last human empire, the Brush Nations, is next. They're spread throughout almost 30 fairly weak sites, and never really developed a strong military because they believed Kul Alramtar was on their side. The ghosts of the human adventurers that naively served Kul Alramtar sit in the tavern and watch the military march off against their homeland. The humans do send tribute to beg for mercy, but neither that nor an army sent to plea for peace even delay the attacks. Early autumn, 6 months left. Forgotten Beasts arrive, but the chaotic nightmare of Kul Alramtar has them immediately swarmed by ant people. More raids, more human towns fall in earnest. 5 months left. Stressed soldiers lollygag about the fields of corpses while working up the motivation to join the rest of their squads abroad. Every soldier left is so good with their weapons that a single one can fully protect them from the ant people while dancing about the foes with their axe. But that only has to be tested to shore up squads that lost good dwarves in these never-ending wars. Late autumn. 4 months and 24 sites left after the foes resettled a few towns to try and avoid the dwarves' eyes. One ant person managed to sneak past the lone soldier and kills Kulet, the cook that had worked in the fortress's kitchen since it was first made 9.5 years ago. 3 months left. Medtab leads his dragons at the last human stronghold in the world. It weathered their first attack and even killed 4 soldiers to stave off their destruction, but they end up crushed by the full might of the dwarven army. Some of the last civilians head to capture it, and soon, all that's left of the world's humans is 8 little villages that offer road bumps and not real resistance. 2.5 months left. Even though there are only 11 civilians left in the entire fortress, 3 are drafted to be sent abroad to capture the last human sites still resisting the military. Medtab launches attacks against the last elven civilization. Now every non-dwarven town in the world is either at war with Kul Alramtar, an owned vassal, or nothing at all. Late winter arrives, 6 weeks. Greedy citizens trying to occupy places with too many defenders are rebuffed, and the Dwarven attacks are slowly left less and less effective without anyone to replace the soldiers that have died in combat. It slows down progress, as do continued efforts to steal back even conquered capitals in the far southwest, and it takes the attention of 4 squads and a civilian away from the war efforts in the north. 5 weeks left. Blight abounds. The nearly lifeless tavern is occupied by broken spirits and filled with ghosts of dreams that once seemed possible. Medtab leads her dragons and friends alike against the strongest elven sites, but none of their forest retreats were ever particularly threatening to begin with. 4 weeks left. The missions take a week or two, so they've perhaps got 2 left each at best. It'll be 1 if militia leaders don't stop sleeping in the bedrooms. A different militia captain gets fed a meal in their sleep instead of doing their job, so they can enjoy their last little power nap before this ends, one way or another. 3 weeks, 7 human sites, a few goblin hamlets, and 2 last elven retreats. The military's last raising missions are assigned, while the final civilians and a few soldiers unassigned from their squads because their lollygagging lasted a little too long are assigned to squads of people sent to conquer foreign sites. With a dozen more civilians, this would already be over. As is, there's 17 people in the entire fortress. Even just one of the Forgotten Beasts attack from before could be the difference maker. 2 weeks left till the Ides of Granite and this 10-year journey is over. 10 sites remain. At the current pace, it would be impossible, but there is one last trick to blindly and desperately leap at this finish line. The Thin Helms stop raising sites and move to occupy Spotted Lulls, the largest human stronghold left. Because the occupying force aren't made of civilians, the enemies are much more likely to capitulate without needing to actually have their defenders defeated by multiple rounds of attacks. The other squads return from their final raising mission successfully. 11 days. Each of the squads are sent out 1 or 2 at a time to conquer these last sites, including the goblin stronghold held by a demon. A human counterattack arrives seeking mercy for the final human site in the world, but they're just ignored. The military can't wait for them this close to the end. The squads depart past them and take their targets one after another. It's best this way. What's still here for them back home? Urist was the farmer that arrived with Zolban and the others almost 10 years ago, but he dies stumbling about in his crazed depression just days before it's over. 6 days remain. Medtab's final attack worked, but the dwarves only slowly trickle back. 5 days. 1 captain arrives and is immediately sent back out to seize his site. 1 more squad is sent out moments later, and though Medtab returns, she stays in Kolalrimtar to stare at the map. She's looking for outliers, sites that have resisted attention so far, but she finds none. Every single site in the entire world is nothing but ruins, fully occupied, or has a mission headed there now. 4 days. 3. Medtab is stressed and depressed. 2 days left. News comes back of successes, but there are still squads that haven't reported back. If even 1 fails or is a day late, this whole challenge will be failed. Medtab's squad group up near the humans, though taking them on with so few is suicide. But conquering the world means at least routing this army, so what other choice is there? 1 day left. More good news returns from abroad, but the Commander Supreme is too busy fighting to hear it. Medtab has over 200 confirmed kills, but she dies beneath the dozens of humans screaming for her head the day before the mission ends. As that final sword swings at her, she finds strength to lift the shield one more time, but the looming threat that the mission may fail looms heavier than even her arm. This is a merciful and fitting end for one as her, gone into the night dreaming that their whole mission is a success. 1 site falls, only Hexdeath is left. The 14th arrives. This is the final day. Just 1 more sunset and it'll have been exactly 10 years. A pop-up makes me think the mission is done, but it's just irrelevant bait. Please, please. Yes. Hexdeath, far to the north is conquered and incorporated. The deed is done, the war's all won, and all it cost was, of everything, one. Kulalrimtar is an almost abandoned, rotting mess that can't be called a home even for the few dwarves unlucky enough to be here. The military is entirely gone. The dwarves in the neutral rags, including Medtab herself, died defeating enough of the humans that their spirits broke when they heard their homeland had been wiped out. They have nowhere to go, and so they leave to wander into the lonely, empty world. Holy crap, what a ride. A strong start was tempered by problems with miasma and ant people in the middle of the run until I had no idea if it would even be possible. If you haven't already, make sure to like this video to help me out. And really, I'm gonna toot my own horn here and say that this victory deserves it more than any other of my videos. Check out some of my other content, and if you find yourself liking a lot of it, subscribe so you don't miss upcoming videos as I return to a couple familiar games I've featured on the channel and a few new ones. Thanks again to boot.dev for sponsoring this video. Use my link in the description to check out their courses for free and use my code for 25% off your first payment.